Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me again this evening. This evening, I'm going to be looking at having difficult conversations, but with difficult people. And we've all met difficult people. What the hell was that? 1 second, just let me turn this off. Just realized my other computer is on. I need to knock that off. Let's start that again, everyone. Hello. This evening, I'm going to be looking at having difficult conversations with difficult people. Um, we all know difficult people. We've all come across them. A lot of people watch my channel or have been in or are in situations with maybe difficult people, manipulative people, selfish people, narcissistic people, and so on. And sometimes you're having a conversation with them, it feels like it's going around in circles. Sometimes they might be doing or saying something in the hope of catching you out, so they maybe can try to, manipulate you, gaslight you, things like that to show how much more clever they are and so on. Um, Sometimes you might be put in a situation where someone's trying to push you into saying something, again, maybe trying to get a response or a reaction that they maybe could use against you. So the first thing to think about is maybe just about being genuine, being honest with yourself, and if you will, being authentic. Now, I did a whole live stream previously on being authentic, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. But when you're being authentic, what you're not necessarily doing is you're not telling everybody what you're thinking and what you're feeling and so on, but you are being honest with yourself, okay? You're aware of your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own values. You have a level of self awareness. You're recognizing that sometimes someone could be doing or something. They're really trying to prod your ego. They're trying to insult you. They're trying to do something that's going to get some kind of a response. Um, so, whenever we're being authentic, we could recognize that we have flaws. We don't know everything. We can't manage everything. We make mistakes. We don't have all of the information. Sometimes the very thing that maybe a narcissistic person will try to exploit. When you're using things like your awareness, especially if you know someone quite well, what you might recognize is narcissistic people generally don't do humility well. Okay. And humility, among other things, it's just being genuine, it's just being honest with yourself. It's as I say, recognizing there's some things you don't know, there's some things you get wrong. That is not a sign of weakness, even though the other person may be trying to push it as if it is, as if they have some kind of superiority, but not necessarily. As I say, with authenticity, you're just recognizing what you do know, what you don't know. Other people know things you don't, can do things you can't, have information you don't have, and so on. You're also aware of your values and things like that. You're aware of your boundaries as well. What's acceptable and what isn't. What's yours and what's the other person's. Another thing that can happen sometimes in manipulative relationships is the other person can sometimes try to hold you to account for how they feel about something, as if you're responsible for their feelings. Well, you're not. Okay, now I'm always careful how I say this because what we can't do is we can't throw stones at people and say it's not me that's hurting you, it's the stones. Okay, so we can't do that. We have to have a level of responsibility, but we are not responsible for how someone feels about our no, or whatever it happens to be. That's their stuff. Now, we can empathize, we can have compassion, we can have sympathy, but we still don't own it. That's not something we're inflicting on the other person. What we're recognizing is sometimes they will try to twist it as if it is something that we're doing bad. So, having that level of authenticity is another way of looking at it is also remembering that getting the last word doesn't always make you right. Again, you could be having a conversation with someone, and it doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter what you say. They will try to push something. They will try to twist something. They will try to find flaw. They will try to put you in your box, put you in your place. Getting the last word doesn't mean you're right. Sometimes all it means is you've got the other person to shut up or you've got them to disengage. Sometimes when we recognize that, again, we're aware of our own ego and stuff. Yeah, not necessarily a bad thing. to be able to maybe pick your battles. Sometimes, for the sake of a quiet life, let them have the last word, because you could be dealing with someone who, it doesn't matter what it is, they are not going to listen to a damned word you say. It's always going to be about them. The other thing I'm thinking is, if you are having that conversation with someone who is narcissistic, remember the conversation is always going to be about them. It's about how something affects them, what something means to them. Remember, the world revolves around them. Everything has something to do with them. That's how they filter things. That's how they react to things. Either that, or you just might have someone who will keep on trying to turn the conversation into be something about them. They have a much more interesting story. Something worse happened to them. They are much more important, or whatever it is. It isn't necessarily a bad thing to either let them have the last word, just disengage. I'm thinking as well, sometimes you're not having a conversation face to face. It could be online, it could be on social media or something. And you get that person or those people that will just keep on finding fault, misrepresenting, misinterpreting things you've said or whatever. It's entirely up to you whether or not you engage with them. Again, someone could genuinely be confused. They might genuinely not understand something. There could be that could be their own authenticity, if you will. Other times, maybe it's about using your discernment, because it doesn't matter what you say, they are still going to twist something. They're going to try to browbeat you somehow. If you will, when you're engaging with people like that, sometimes you're really engaging in a rigged game. Doesn't matter what it is, there will always be something they will come back with. And you will frustrate the hell out of yourself trying to get them to see sense. So, something to consider is, if you are dealing with someone like that, you can give an account of yourself if that's what you want to do. You can restate the original fact or statement, whatever it was. You can, of course, accept that you might be wrong about something. But what you're not necessarily going to do is try to convince someone. You're not going to try and convince them to see your way, to see things your way, or see things from your perspective. If it's someone you know, that is always going to twist something, recognize there is no combination of words that's suddenly going to make something click into place and they'll say, oh yeah, that's it, you were right the whole time. They will always find something. And there are some people as well, if you pay attention to them, you could almost sense they're feeding off your frustration as you're trying to explain yourself. So something to consider is, pardon me, take a quick drink. It's the thing about doing live. I get to do this from videos. I get to edit this bit. Where'd I get to? Yeah, you're not necessarily trying to convince anyone. You give an account of yourself if you have to. You restate the fact, be open to maybe other information. But other than that, you're not expecting them to suddenly see things your way. They might just keep on going till they get the last word. Remember, choose your battles. If it's not that big a deal, let them have the last word. They're off happy in their delusion, but that's really all it is. Bear in mind as well, you could be talking to someone who's only really, if I say that they're not, it's not that they're not listening, but they might only be listening for certain things, for certain words, certain phrases, things that they can use. It's like filtering. And as I said, they get fed by your frustration. They get fed by you continually trying to explain something. And I think a good indicator of this is, it doesn't matter what you say, you're being constantly interrupted, talked over the top of, with something else being thrown at you as you're trying to explain the last thing. So recognize, as I said, what you could be playing is a rigged game. It's just something aimed at frustrating you. It's aimed at browbeating you. It's aimed at making you feel a certain way. And you choose whether or not you want to engage. Something else to consider as well is, if you're dealing with someone who's narcissistic, one of the key traits, key characteristics is being disagreeable. Doesn't matter what it is. You could present them with reality. They're still going to find something. They will know somebody who knows something you don't. They will know an expert. They will They will have information, even if they've just made it up there and then. They will remind you of the time you were wrong about something. You're dealing with someone who is, by their very nature, disagreeable. So, how do you come to an agreement with someone who is disagreeable? How do you reason with someone who has set out to be unreasonable? How do you negotiate with selfish? When you get a sense of what you're dealing with, the conversation can sound very, very different. Something to remember as well is, even if you have a point, you know you're right about it, but the other person just keeps on rejecting it. It's like, again, they won't see reality, they won't hear anything at all. You don't necessarily need their validation. If you have the information, if you know it to be true, if you know it to be factual, you were there, you saw it, you felt it, all the rest of it. If you have that, you don't necessarily need them to agree with you. Because let me put it to you this way. Whether or not they accept what you're saying, what does that actually change? If you think about that, what does that actually change? Whether or not they agree with you, whether or not they believe you. You're trying to tell them something. You had a piece of toast for breakfast. Now, something that even as mundane as that, they'll tell you you're lying. You had cornflakes. Why would you have to convince them you had toast? You didn't have cornflakes just because they're insisting that you did. You don't necessarily need their validation. Now, what you had for breakfast is a very minor, kind of trivial example. But even if you think of something greater, something bigger than that, they're denying something happened. They are trying to give you their version where you were at fault, or it didn't happen, or whatever it was. Whether or not they believe you, whether or not they're going to accept it, changes nothing. You were a witness. Okay? You were a witness. That does not, no matter what they say, no matter what they think, nothing changes that. Again, another way of being authentic is to keep that foot in reality, your own sense of yourself, your own sense of reality, trusting in yourself and your own experiences. We can be open to, again, different interpretations, different perspectives, and so on, but that doesn't necessarily change anything. If you're dealing with someone who's trying to rewrite your narrative, again, that could drive you insane. So you keep a foot in the real world, that it's your perspective, it's your experience, and all the rest of it. Okay, you do not need their approval, you do not need their validation. What they think doesn't change a damn thing. Sometimes you could be dealing with someone who can become quite threatening. They might threaten to tell people about you. They might threaten to put in a complaint about you. They might threaten, any number of things. They're going to tell your family about you. They're going to ring your workplace about you. They're going to do all this, that, and the other. That can be scary. That can be frightening. Narcissistic people do tend to, among other things, they target our fear of public opinion. They target our fear of what others think of us, how others see us. Again, you don't necessarily have to do or say anything, but bear in mind, in fact, I'm going to give you a real life example. It's a friend of mine a lot. I think I've shared this with you before. So if you've heard this story, just gloss over it, go for a cup of tea or whatever, and then come back again. But a friend of mine a lot of years ago, he was having problems in work. There was someone bothering him. This person wasn't doing their job. They were getting him to do their job for them, sending people to him to do his work for him. And anytime he confronted him, there was usually some kind of argument, some kind of fight, and it would end up with a threat that he was going to put in a complaint that he was being bullied. This friend of mine kept backing down every single time. So he was telling me about it. We were having a chat. This is the thing, as if I'm supposed to know what to do. But he was telling me about it and asking what he could do or what he should do about it. And it didn't matter what I said to him. He would immediately come back with things like, yes, but then he'll do this, but then he'll say that, and then he'll the other thing. And after a few minutes of this, I kind of sort of said to him that really what you're doing is you're arguing against yourself on the other person's behalf, which is pretty much what he was doing. Didn't matter what he would try, there would always be something. And I reminded him as well that there's probably no easy way out of this or no easy way through this. It's going to have to be something that he's going to have to do. It's not necessarily going to be the easy path. But I asked him what other people would be doing, and he says other people don't listen to him, other people just shrug him off, other people go back to doing what they're doing, other people just, whatever. So again, I'm asking, why can't you do the same thing? And again, he would be saying, because of this, because of that, again, arguing against himself. But then it got to the point where I was looking at these threats, the threats of being bullied and the threats of putting in complaints. And what we kind of came to the conclusion was what this guy was saying was, if you don't do what I say, I'm going to exaggerate and lie about you. And that was pretty much it. That's the only threat he had. If you don't do what I say, I will exaggerate. I will tell lies. When we got to that point, a friend of mine, it's like a light bulb came on. He suddenly realized, yeah, it's exactly it. I'm going to have to face lies. Sometimes that's what we're doing. Whenever we're faced with someone who's threatening us, they're threatening our reputation, they're threatening to tell people about us. If we recognize they're threatening to exaggerate, they're threatening to tell other people about the things they accuse us of. Again, that's not pleasant, and the consequences might not be nice. I suppose it depends on the accusations, I guess, and the situation. Not pleasant. But when you get a sense if that's what it is, it can become a bit easier to deal with. Especially if they're trying to do this in a way where they're trying to provoke some kind of victim. They're trying to do something where you will respond and they can claim some kind of victimhood. This almost, if you will, it bolsters up their narrative that they're the victim in the scenario. You're not necessarily being harsh, mean, cruel. You're not necessarily threatening anyone by just being clear, concise, and honest, regardless of their response. Something that you might find useful is trying to just be concise and factual, trying not to be emotive about your responses if you are responding. If you are responding, remember a response is always more powerful than a reaction. Whenever we react, the other person has control. Whenever we respond, we have control. That doesn't mean that people aren't going to exploit our responses, but we do still have a lot more control. The other thing is when people are threatening to put in complaints and things, I always think of what do you call him? Mark Twain that said, was it, trying to remember the exact quote. Yeah, you should always tell the truth because that way you don't have to remember anything. When you just are clear, concise, and you're telling the truth, the other person's jumping all over the place. They're trying to, it's like playing whack-a-mole. They're just throwing things all over the place. They're throwing things, hoping something's going to stick. They jump all over the place, and there is nothing to back any of it up. But when you're just telling the truth as it was, whatever it was, even if it was uncomfortable, as we're doing that, the other person has really nowhere to go with it. So we try to be concise. We try to be honest. We try not to be emotive. We don't necessarily insult. We can be honest, but we're not necessarily brutally honest. We're not as blunt as a brick. Pardon me, have another drink. It's very warm in here tonight. I have the heating on because it's cold outside, but it's warm in here. So where did I get to? Yeah, we're being factual. We're being neutral. We're not necessarily trying to give emotive responses. We are not holding ourselves responsible for how they feel about something. We're also not responsible for their opinions. Okay. I would say sometimes even silence is a very powerful kind of response. They don't get a reaction or a response. We just don't engage at all. They could be coming out with the most insane nonsense. They're hoping for something, some kind of engagement, but we don't give anything at all. Maybe it's not really on our radar. It's not really worth mentioning. Going back to what I was saying earlier about the authenticity, recognizing they could be doing or saying something that is impacting our sense of self, maybe insulting our ego and things like that. When we know that that's what they're doing, again, that gives us a choice. We either engage or we don't. And if we engage, it's how do we engage? You might find as well in difficult conversations, a lot of it tends to be circular. The logic is illogical. A lot of it is nonsensical. You've heard the term word salad. There's just words thrown out in the hope that they're going to form something reasonably coherent, but they very rarely do. It goes all over the place. You might even hear things like, if you do respond, well, that's not what you said last time, that's not what you said last week, or whatever it is. If you didn't say the exact same thing word for word, chances are that's what they're going to do. The, trying to think of an example. Going back to the breakfast example, it's a bit like saying, sometimes I would have toast for breakfast. And then another time saying, every now and again, I'll have some toast for breakfast. You've just said the same thing, but you've said it differently. And some people are very high, well, I wouldn't say highly manipulative. It's more like Wile E. Coyote level. They will pick up that you did not use the exact same words. So therefore, they'll throw it at you that you didn't say the same thing. They're trying to confuse you, make you feel as if you're a liar, get yourself to explain yourself. Again, we tie ourselves up in knots trying to get someone to understand who has set out not to understand. Sometimes you just repeat the point. Sometimes I have toast. We just say the same thing. We say the same thing over and over again. We don't over explain. We just stick to the point. If you will, we sound like that broken record. We just repeat the same thing over and over again, regardless. They're not going to hear it. They're not necessarily going to get it. We just accept that. We just accept they're not going to hear it. Probably on some level they have. They're just refusing to, if you will. And again, they're aiming, going back to being the disagreeable. They're being very highly disagreeable, so they can't accept it, if you will. There's also that need. Their ego needs fed. They need to win. They need to grind you down somehow. So we just stick to the same point. Another way of handling a conversation with a difficult person is, and I've said this many times on many of my videos, I think I might have said it a couple of times on live streams. Whenever we are hit with something, maybe an odd question, a difficult question, or we're accused of something, we just respond with a question back. We ask for examples. We ask what they mean. We ask when this happened. I like to call it the Columbo approach. If you remember the Detective Columbo, he was always polite. He was always courteous. Now, he did come across as a bit of a pest, but he was always decent. He was always nice. He was always respectful. And he dealt with everything with just one more question. Something's not making sense. Help me understand this. What about this? And could you tell me about whatever? It's always one more question. So if you're using that Columbo approach, remember, we're not necessarily being obstinate. We're not setting out to insult someone. We're not trying to antagonize them. No, if you will, we just have a polite curiosity. We're accused of, I don't know, eating croissants instead of toast. Well, when did I eat the croissants? When did this happen? And why is that important? Whatever it is, we just keep on asking questions. What you're doing is you're giving them their own work to do. You're not necessarily engaging. You're not over explaining. You're not trying to reason with them. You're not trying to get them to see things your way. You just get them to do their own work. You're not burning up energy. Let me put it to you this way. Imagine they put you on a hamster wheel and you're having to run as fast as you can. No matter how fast you run, you're not going anywhere. You're burning yourself out and you're frustrated because you're in the same spot no matter how fast you're running. When you get them to do their own work, what you're doing is you're just turning that hamster wheel around and sliding it back, and you're putting them on it. So they're running as fast as they can, trying to do their own work. You're not doing it for them. The other thing, the last thing I will say is, again, when it comes to being authentic, I said this at the beginning, what you're not necessarily doing is displaying every thought, every feeling. You're not communicating that. You can if you think it would be useful, if you think it would be helpful. You're being genuine, you're being authentic. I suppose ways of doing that, rather than saying something like, When you do that, you drive me insane. You're an absolute crazy person. There's the difference between saying that and saying, whenever you behave like that, I find myself getting very irritated or very frustrated. One is an attack. The other one is just talking about it from your perspective. You're owning it. Some people find that helpful. I would suggest it really depends on who you're dealing with, because if you were to tell someone you find yourself you feeling hurt or feeling frustrated or feeling whatever it is, remember you could be dealing with someone who's looking for emotional responses. So you've just told them what works and they might continue. So it's really about using your discernment. Okay. So kind of whizzed through this evening. Where are we? We're just at 25 past. Gone through this a lot quicker than I normally do. Being authentic is just being honest with yourself. It's being genuine with yourself. It's recognizing your own thoughts, feelings, your own ego. It's looking at your own values, your own limits, your boundaries, and things like that. It's recognizing what's yours and what's the other person's. If you find yourself getting agitated and frustrated, being authentic is you're recognizing that. What you're not going to allow that to do is to dictate what happens next, but you're going to allow it to inform you, because it could be it's best to disengage here, or it could be to just stick to the point that I'm making. I'm going to stop explaining. I'm going to stop trying to get them to reason. I'm just going to stick to the point. It can, as I say, it can inform what comes next. Okay. So there we go for this evening. Let's have a look. I hope you found that interesting. I hope you found that helpful. It is something I would say to practice. It is something that can be useful. You can learn some of these techniques: assertiveness, communication, coaching can be useful for this sort of thing. Anybody's ever been to a life coach or would be interested in going to a life coach? It's not really my field. I don't do coaching, but it is something that you can find useful. Other than that, practice. I would say if you have someone you feel comfortable, safe with, share with them. You know, it might sound a bit odd, but here's what I'm trying to do. If you don't have someone you feel safe and comfortable with, use the bathroom mirror. Make sure there's no one watching. Of course, it's not a spectator sport. Close the door, look at yourself in the mirror. What do you look like when you stand with your back straight, with your head up, when you make eye contact and just speak clearly and concisely? Practice these things, and practice them in little small ways, in little safe ways, and build up your confidence. I'm going to say to people, if you want to have a look at this, it's a really good book. Sometimes I would recommend this to people or suggest this to people. It's a book by Paul Hawke. That's Hauck. And it's just called How to Stand Up for Yourself. It's a really good book, and I really like it because it's written in plain, simple English. There's no convoluted psychobabble. It's just plain, simple English, and there are real life examples of some of the reasons why we get caught up in some of these situations, why we don't assert ourselves, why we maybe don't communicate certain things, why we back down, why we why we don't stand up for ourselves. He gives real life examples that I think we can all identify with, but he also gives really good techniques and exercises. And one of the things that he says, which I think is really good, you can apply this to almost anything, is a lot of the time we fear things like things will get worse. We fear we're going to look like the bad guy. We fear we're going to be rejected. We fear we're going to fail. And what he reinforces in his book a lot of the time is, don't worry about failing, because of course you're going to fail, because we never get everything right, certainly not the first time. And we have to learn from our failures every bit as much as we do from our successes. We build on them. We have to learn from what doesn't work, as much as we do from what does. So if anybody wants to have a look at that book, you probably find it online somewhere, eBay or Amazon or something like that. It's just called How to Stand Up for Yourself. As I say, it's a useful little book, plain simple English, and a lot of real life examples that we can all identify with. So let's have a look at the questions. Let's go back to the beginning. And where are we? How do I pop out? There we go. There's that pop out chat thing. Okay, let's have a look. And have to go back to the beginning. Where do we get to? Therapy, lots of therapy, says T. Kinsella. Not sure the concept of that book or the what's going on there because I think I've missed what came first. Like different things says good evening. Hello, like different things. Being calm always makes you right. Lego me ego, if I've pronounced that right. Being calm doesn't necessarily always make you right, but being calm can help you to think a bit clearer, to think about maybe what the best response is, not necessarily what we think is a good response, the one that's going to help us to win or whatever, but maybe what the right response is. It can also help us if we're just restating the same facts over and over again. As I said earlier, it's not trying to be neutral, not necessarily being overly emotive. Okay, so that can help. Carol says projection not only hurts us, but it helps us understand what the narcissist is thinking about themselves. That's a really good point, Carol. That's an interesting point. It's a really good point. You're right, because a lot of the times the things you're accused of are the things they do themselves. If I could add to that, sometimes some of the things you're accused of are the things that other people have done to hurt them throughout their lives. And it's sometimes you find yourself accused of some of the really strangest things, whatever it is. You have these motives, these sinister motives for something. And what you don't realize is that could be something that someone else has done to them that's hurt them, maybe as they were growing up or whatever. So there is the things that they've done themselves, but there are the things other people have done to them. And I think if you're paying attention, sometimes some of those projections can give you an insight about them. You're absolutely right. And T. Gonzalez says, yeah, agreeing about reveals their inner securities. Yeah. You've just put that a lot better than I just have. It was quite convoluted, and that's a good way. It is a good way of recognizing their insecurities. Amanda says, Darren, I find I can get on easily with everyone else but my brother, now nearly 70, which winds me up no matter how calm. Try to be. Any advice, please? Well, this is the difficulty in a long-term situation. And if you think of a brother, chances are you've known him your whole life. Some people can know each other so well in a long-term situation or a long-term relationship. When one of them does or says something, it triggers something in the other, and that brings up a reaction. That reaction then triggers something in the first person, and back and forward it goes. It's maybe trying to find a way to break that pattern. There are different ways of doing it. I mean, seeing a therapist, if you were to see someone together, to try to find ways of communicating. But maybe trying to take a step back and asking yourself, what has just been said, what was just done, recognize it could have been something that was maybe aimed at antagonizing. It could have been, but also recognizing what's coming up for you that you're being antagonized. Said earlier on about trying to think of a response as opposed to a reaction. Okay, so hope you find that helpful. Hello, Ellie. She's saying hello to everyone. Walking Truth. They love Walking Truth says they love to continue an argument that no one wins. It's fun to them. Yes, there is something on in that, in the sense that some people feed off the energy. Even when something has maybe been resolved, they will still try to find something to try and keep it going. It's like they're feeding on it. When you recognize you're dealing with someone like that, again, that comes down to your own discernment, your own self-awareness. What do you want to do with that? Do you want to continue engaging? Do you just want to leave whatever it is they say? Do you want to leave it hanging in the air? You don't necessarily have to engage. And Carl says the gray rock method works. Does work when they're getting, as I say, responses, maybe one word answers or whatever. What they're not getting are the emotive responses or the emotive reactions. As the expression goes, you're like a rock. You're boring. You're gray. You're dull. You don't do anything. You just kind of sit there as rocks do. So you're not performing for them, if you will. Bambi on ice. Spinning, trying to reason with a narcissist, or even more on the nose. It's like being caught in a spider's web. Depending on the person, remember what I said earlier, if you ask yourself sometimes out of the situation, how exactly do you negotiate with someone who is selfish? How do you reason with someone who has set out to be unreasonable? How do you come to some kind of agreement with someone who is inherently disagreeable? When you recognize some of those things, they can inform your interactions. You're not necessarily going into something to win, but you could be going into something to just state your case. What they do with it is entirely up to them. You're stating the fact, you're saying no, you're doing whatever it is. You're not responsible for how they feel about it. You're not trying to win them round. You're not trying to convince them. You just tell them as it is. What they do with the information is maybe entirely up to them. Let me see. Pal says, every time I watch your mental health videos, I feel like I have every mental health condition out there. Well, you see, this is the thing about mental health. We all have it, every single one of us. And if you were to look at things like what they call maybe disorders and personality disorders, you could have an anxiety disorder, but then you could also have anxiety. Having anxiety doesn't mean you have an anxiety disorder. Avoiding something that is deeply unpleasant doesn't mean you have avoidant personality. Being disagreeable and having a sense of entitlement doesn't necessarily make you a narcissist, because you could be in a situation that requires you to be very disagreeable. The last thing you want to do, for instance, is maybe take the first offer that someone offers you. You know, you're selling something and they offer you pittance for it. You know it's worth 20 times that. You're not necessarily going to take the first offer, so you're going to need a level of disagreeableness. The difference is when these things maybe become heightened, when they're ongoing, whenever they are continual, that's the difference. But other than that, we all have different levels of different things. Okay. And sometimes we might even be reacting normally to something. You know, big great white shark comes charging at you, chances are you're going to feel terror. That's normal. That's not a mental health problem. That's normal. Terror is not a nice feeling, but it's a normal reaction to something like Jaws coming at you. Jay Reid on scapegoats is the best source for truth tellers. Carl, you're absolutely right. Jay Reid has an amazing channel full of some really, really good information, and he's very, very good at how he communicates it. He has this skill, this knack of being able to put things very clearly, very concisely, and he explains things in a way that pretty much anybody could grasp. He's really, really good. He's got an excellent channel. Anybody out there, if you haven't looked at Jay Reid's channel yet, have a look. He does specifically talk about narcissistic families and dynamics, but it would apply to pretty much any situation or environment, a lot of the stuff that he talks about. Kevin says, difficult people, like that advertisement with the girl literally throwing up on the camera. Haven't seen that advertisement, so I don't know what you're talking about. Difficult people in the sense that they set out, not difficult in the sense that they're struggling. Difficult in the sense that they set out to make things difficult for others. Okay, that's what I mean by difficult people. Capitalists are difficult people. Well, I suppose they could be, but I haven't met them all, so I couldn't say. Where do we get to? You're also the victim of their projections, so shame is at your very core, but it's not yours. That's an interesting concept, yes, as well. Sometimes it's not our shame, it's someone else's. The other thing to think about when it comes to shame is shame is not a nice feeling, but it can be a good deterrent because it stops us doing things that are going to make us feel shame. We're not going to behave in such a way. Other times, shame could be something that is, as you say, it's kind of dumped on us. It's instilled in us. We're led to believe there's something bad or wrong about us. But I emphasize the word led to believe, okay? It could just be from someone's own, maybe narcissistic perspective. It's not necessarily yours, and it's not necessarily other people's. Um, Michael says, be honest, rule one. Let's say, be honest, as that guy says, Mark Twain said, if you tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything. Yeah. Once people lie, your conversation is over. It's the interesting thing about lying. Some people will lie to try and cheat you, to try and con you. Some people will lie to try to manipulate you and coerce you. But then some people will lie to you for no other reason and they just assume that you're stupid. They think that you can't see through them. And you probably know people like that because you can almost see them studying you as they're telling you whatever it is. They're watching to see how you're picking up. So they're assuming that you're an idiot or something. Where did we get to? Where did we get to? See, this is whenever it jumps. I have to find out where I got to. Sean says we have to let it run its course then. Eventually they get bored and move on to someone else. If they're desperate for some kind of audience, then chances are they will just move on to someone else. If they see they're not getting the responses or the reactions, or you won't perform the way they want you to, yeah, sooner or later they're maybe just going to stop trying. Doesn't mean that along the way they won't try different things. And I suppose this is the difficulty, and it's again, it's like that story about the boy that cried wolf. Sometimes you're dealing with someone, and they could well be very genuine about what they're saying, but you're so used to them just playing these silly games that you're not really listening. So that can be a part of it as well. Where did I get to? See, I'm going to have to scroll back because this has jumped. Okay. Suppose let it run its course. Oh, right. I've just answered that one, Sean. Salem calling out 90% of society or more. If that's why so many cannot deal with their own problems, he calls. I have no idea what that means. Probably a context to it, but I don't understand it. I'm sorry about that. Where did we get to? Leslie says, engaging never works. Saying your piece may be beneficial, but they will never hear you. Yeah, so something I was saying earlier, you're not necessarily trying to convince someone or get them to see things your way. You say your piece, what they do with it isn't up to them. But even then, you maybe have to think, is it worth saying your piece? Because remember who and what you might be dealing with. They might just be filtering. All they want is some kind of engagement. Even if you're answering a question, that's just maybe the engagement they need to be able to start talking about something that's really important to them. Or it could be to try and, as I say, maybe manipulate you somehow. It's about using your own discernment. What are you going to get from engaging with this person? You might have to, but even then, it's how do you do it? Where do we go? Amanda says they split hairs, very tedious. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's like I said earlier, sometimes I eat toast or I eat toast now and again. You've just been accused of lying and being inconsistent. Yeah, even though it's the same thing. Let me see. USA left purity fetish, Midwest marks rated or be ignorant. Kevin, there's probably a lot going on here that I'm missing, but I really don't know what some of this means. Sean says, finds it informative. Thank you. You're welcome. It's good. I'm glad you do. And Pal says, if a narcissist says he has seen a flying elephant, then best to respond and say, once the elephant came through my window, they will understand that you can see through their BS. I see where you're going with that. Yeah, it's a way. it's, if you will, it's almost a sarcastic. Is this the right way? It's a sarcastic way of calling them out on it. Well, you can certainly do that, but what I would say is always, discern who you're talking to, because sometimes you never know how someone's going to react. See, where do we get to? Ellie says, "Thank you, hamster energy." Conservation, great tips. Yeah, a lot of the times what you really do, you find yourself on a hamster wheel. It's just this big giant hamster wheel and you're running as fast as you can, and they're not hearing a damned word, so you think running faster and they're still not hearing any, and you're burning yourself out. Yeah, just slide it over, get them to run on their own wheel, get them to do their own work. Juliet says, very helpful for me at work. Tools to keep my peace and sanity. Thank you, Darren. You're welcome, Julietta. I'm glad you find that helpful. Remember, you're keeping a sense of yourself. You're being honest. You're being authentic, but with yourself. You can be honest with other people as well, but again, you're using your discernment. You do not necessarily need to tell them what you're thinking, what you're feeling. You can if you think it'll help resolve the situation, but it's entirely up to you. It always depends on the situation. And I've just jumped all over the place. Where did we get to? I'm just about to read something and it moved. It might be projection. Where do we go? Sean says these people must be in an awful lot of pain within themselves. Actually, they are. I would say they are. And they're in pain for a lot of different reasons. There is their own shame that they're always trying to keep at bay. And they will behave in the most sometimes ridiculous ways, even destructive ways, in order to try to get rid of the shame. There is the pain and the shame of maybe just being ordinary. There is the pain and the shame of maybe someone having other friends. They're not the center of their universe. There is room. They find it hard to understand that someone can have room in their lives for other friends. There is also, when you're talking to a narcissistic person, and watch this with politicians, okay? Here's something to watch out for with politicians. You ask a question and they don't necessarily answer the question. They don't necessarily hear the question as such. They're not thinking of the right answer. They're not even necessarily thinking of the correct answer or even the honest answer. A lot of the time, they are trying to think of what makes them sound interesting, or what makes them sound clever, or what the correct thing to say in this situation would be. So there's a lot of inner turmoil, because a lot of the time it's all about how other people see them. It's to worry about how other people see them. You could be having a conversation with a narcissistic person. Let's say you're in a bar or you're a restaurant. They're not just talking to you and trying to see how you're reading them, how they are reflected in your eyes, what you think of them. It's almost like unconsciously they're looking at everybody in the room. How does that person over there see me? Am I standing the right way? What about this person over here? It's a constant battle of believing everything is about them and everything revolves around them and everybody is looking at them and thinking about them. And if they're not, they should be. So there is a lot of inner turmoil, and it's largely aimed at escaping feelings of shame, inadequacy, whatever. Okay, so yes, there is a lot of inner turmoil. Where do we get to? Tracy says narcissists are predictable. Don't be predictable with them. They are predictable. Just like any personality construct, it can be very complex and multi-layered. But the behaviors are very, very predictable. And some things that I've heard people talk about when it comes to their recovery is learning to be unpredictable. Not necessarily to, do something crazy and wacky and on the spur of the moment, be impulsive. But they might go and learn something new that they hadn't done before. just to put themselves in that situation of being uncertain, learning to be uncertain again, learning to build up their skills so there would be something unpredictable in that. They're doing something for themselves, especially if they've been in a situation or an environment where they were continually told not to. So they start to become predictable in those ways. Okay. Where do we get to? Sixth Sense says, and this is at Kevin, I find Sam Vaknin thought-provoking and provides insight into NPD. Yeah, he's quite big, quite popular as Sam. Look, I didn't know a lot about his stuff previously, but I've seen a few of his videos. He does seem to have some really good insight on some things. Some things I don't fully understand. I need to read up a bit more about it, but yeah, some of his stuff's quite interesting. Amanda says, Darren, excuse the capitals. It's okay, you've got my attention. Another question. If I am the brother's only supply and he has no one else, I asked him to go to therapy with me and he won't do it. Well, what you can't do is you can't force him. It's the thing. You could frog march someone, hold them, force them into therapy. They're not really going to engage. You're not going to do anything. Someone has to want to do it. If he doesn't want to do it, you can't really force him. Some people find, and this doesn't necessarily change anything about the other person, but some people find just accepting them as they are. They accept this is what they do, this is who they are, this is how they behave. They accept that they're not for changing. When we let go of the hope of someone suddenly changing, suddenly becoming better, a lot of the energy we put into managing the relationship, it can shift in the sense that we start to maybe manage things for ourselves, do things for ourselves a bit better or a bit differently. We only use the energy when we're with them and we're in that environment or that situation. Again, it doesn't necessarily change them, but what we've done is we've stopped hoping they're going to change, and we're looking at things in ourselves that we can maybe change. If he won't go to therapy with you, maybe go and see a therapist yourself. See what you could work on. If I've pronounced this right, I can see it. I can see it from here. Paddling Joan. I hope I've got this right. Where do you go? Recently settled a case when an employer moved on when I realized how they would never acknowledge the damage and the mobbing caused. I was looking for validation from others rather than myself. It's not that we don't need or require the validation. There is something in us, I think, that needs a level of validation, in the sense that I'm trying to think of the example I use. Yeah, you fall over, you break your leg, you're in absolute agony, and you scream out, "This really hurts." You imagine someone stands over you and says, "No, it doesn't." Well, it's not their leg. They're not feeling it. And it is really, really hurtful. It's really, it's invalidating, if you will. On one hand, we do need a level of validation. We're not always going to get it from a certain person or a certain situation. We can self-validate in the sense that it is your leg. You know that it hurts. You know that you're in pain. It is your leg. Just because they don't validate you doesn't mean no one else will. There are some people that do know you. They know you quite well. Where do we get to? What's the difference between shame and genuine guilt? That's a good question, pal. I can give you my interpretation if you think, and you're welcome to disagree. These are just my thoughts. Guilt is what we feel whenever we think of the consequences of either something we have done or something we didn't do. So we're thinking about the consequences of something. We're thinking about maybe the consequences, the impact on other people of something we did or didn't do. Shame is what we feel. I think two ways of looking at shame. Shame is what we feel when other people are thinking about the consequences of something we've done. Okay? So there's something external about it. Another way of looking at the shame is what I feel when I think about what I am. That what I would qualify that with is what I'm led to believe I am, led to believe by other people. As if there's something wrong with us. We could feel shame for not knowing algebra or something, as if we're supposed to. Um, unless your job is using algebra, maybe you should know it. But other than that, it's shame is what we feel when we are led to believe what we are. Um, I hope that answers that for you. That's only my take on it. I'm sure there are other explanations. Um, any tips on overcoming guilt, honey? I don't know what guilt, honey, is, unless you're calling me honey. Overcoming guilt. Well, again, guilt is like shame. It's not a nice feeling, but what it can be is it can be a useful deterrent to prevent us doing those things again. Okay, so we can use it constructively, even though it doesn't feel good. We can use it constructively. We're not going to be in that situation again. We're not going to do that again. Okay, it's really about what we learn from those experiences. Where do we get to? Is that called radical acceptance? Yes, it's radically accepting something. And this is the thing about accepting something. I say this so many times. Why we struggle with acceptance is because we're not always looking at it the right way. Sometimes when we accept something, we're saying to ourselves, I have to accept this for now. Okay? It's only for now because it could be the situation we're in. The other thing we could be looking at with acceptance is if we're looking at it the wrong way, accepting something or indeed accepting someone doesn't mean we're fine with it. It doesn't mean we approve of it. It doesn't mean we're okay with what they do. It doesn't mean any of that. Acceptance is just really acknowledging it is what it is. They are what they are. And again, we could be in a situation or an environment, maybe like a workplace or something like that, and it's a horrible place. We accept it is what it is, but we're only accepting it for the here and now, because what we could be doing is we could be updating our CV and planning to get out of there. So yeah, it is radical acceptance. And I think a lot of the times we struggle with it because we're not really looking at it the right way. Where do we get to? Sean says, I'm looking at myself and consider going to hypnotherapy so I don't attract these kind of people in the future. I don't know much about hypnotherapy, so I can't really comment on it. I used to know a hypnotherapist, which is odd. I used to know him because he shared the office that I practice in. It's interesting, all the time I knew him, I never actually got to find out about hypnotherapy, so I can't really comment on it. I don't know if it's good or not. Listening to the sibling problem, I can relate. I've had to withdraw and frame it as I accept not everyone has what I need to support me through chronic illness and still honor my own needs. That's Maeve, that's a nice way of putting it. Accepting not everyone has what you need. And not everyone can do what you want or what you need. Not everyone can. That's yeah. It's kind of, in a sense, that's maybe kind of liberating. Where do we get to? Sorry, Darren was calling you honey. That's okay. It's been a long time from I've been called honey. I'll take whatever honey I can get. Okay. Ginger Carnigan watched a very powerful conversation between Mel Robbins and Dr. Romani Diversila about radical acceptance. Well worth a watch. Yeah, she has some interesting stuff on her channel. I'm doing a video about limerence, looking at limerence. I'm looking at the context of limerence, where it can come from, and looking at how it can be exploited in certain relationships and so on, the things that can go on. When I was reading up on it, about where it comes from and so on, about, it comes from a book in the late 70s from a psychologist. One of the things that came up when I was researching it was a video from Dr. Romani, so I watched it. And she does put it very well when she talks. She's specifically looking at limerence in terms of a narcissistic relationship. I was looking at it overall in general. I was just bringing in a little bit of narcissism towards the end about how it can be exploited. But yeah, she does have some good stuff. Have a look at her video on limerence as well if you want to have. If you also watch mine when it comes out tomorrow, of course. By the way, but she's got that interesting video on limerence if you want to have a look at it as well. Let me see. Guardian Morgans. Thank you for this chat. I've learned so much in a short time from you, along with my strong connection to Source or God. I'm on my way to heal. Thank you again. You're welcome, Guardian. It's always, I'm glad you find these things helpful. Where do we get to? Dr. Romani is the goddess of narcissism. Hope she'd find that as a compliment. Hope she'd take that as a compliment. I'm more third punk on left to narcissism. Give anything a try so I don't make the same mistake again. Thank you, Darren. You see, the thing is, Shan, something to think about is it's not that we always attract them. There can be that, yes. But what we have to recognize as well, there could be something in them that we find attractive, but we don't know they're abusive. We don't know they're narcissistic. We don't know they're self-absorbed until we start to get to know them. What I would say is what you can learn is when you learn from past relationships and past mistakes, and when you start to see repeated patterns, you might have met someone who was really, really nice, genuinely nice. Again, they could be good looking, they could be funny, they could be intelligent, they could be very attentive, they could be ambitious, they could be conscientious. There could be a lot of really attractive qualities. These are often the things we're attracted to. It's when the narcissism starts to leak out, when that starts to become more dominant. It might have been hidden for a while. It's when that comes out, it's what then do we do? And it's maybe about recognizing what's going to happen if I stay in this situation. It's about recognizing as I'm bringing up things with this person, they keep deflecting, they're making excuses, or they're dumping it onto me, but one way or another, things aren't changing. When you get a sense of that, it's up to you. Continue doing what you're doing, or maybe end the relationship. So it's not that we're never going to attract people like that again, but it's knowing how to keep ourselves safe and knowing how to manage things if they do start behaving in certain ways, so that we don't find ourselves going through this cycle over and over again. Like I say, narcissistic people generally don't wear a badge saying, "Hi, I'm a narcissist." They don't wear a hat saying, "Hello, I'm going to exploit you." They generally don't do things like that. It can be very well hidden. And it's also, as I say, they can have qualities that are very, very attractive. They could be a very highly skilled musician. They could play beautiful music. They could be an amazing artist or some kind. They could, they could be, have loads and loads of qualities that anybody would like. It's only when the narcissism comes out, okay? It's what we do then. So where did I get to? People are who they are. Some of us learn to be better humans, some of us don't. Human the way you believe it should. Oh, and I've lost that one. It's jumped all over the place. Right. Emotional manipulation would be threatening. The abuser may threaten the victim, blaming. The abuser blames the victim. That's generally what does happen. They blame their victim. Even an angry response at being provoked is seen as them being the victim. They're being picked on. It's learning how to manage some of these things. I would say it's just being concise sometimes, trying to keep the emotion out of it, keeping things neutral and keeping things factual. You're not necessarily going to change them, but what you're doing is you're showing them that they are not getting what it is they're looking for. Where do we get to? Sixth Sense Amelia says, I'm an autistic person, often unable to read people until it's painfully obvious. Well, even at that, once it's painfully obvious, it's what you do with it. Okay, it's what happens next. It's not that you can't read people at all. It's once it's painfully obvious, then you can see it. Okay, and then the question is, what do you do then? Again, that comes with things like your confidence, your resilience, and things like that. Things that you can build up over time. All right, good. The thing I'm struggling to understand is Guardian Morgan says, I'm struggling to understand the lack of empathy for my narcissistic mom and brother. It's because I'm so empathic. I don't want to give up on them. Is there any hope? I have no idea about your mom and your brother, so I cannot comment on that. If there's no hope in them changing, then it might be learning to manage your expectations. It could be about learning to manage your relationship with them. You're not expecting them to change. You're not hoping they're going to change. Now, you probably find there are little moments and little nuggets where they are quite nice, quite friendly, quite funny, and so on. And you get on quite well. They might not be all the time. They might be more the exception than the rule, but they are still there. It's about how you manage them, maybe whenever they're being difficult. If you want to go no contact, that's entirely up to you. I wouldn't advocate one way or the other. I would ask you to think about, because going no contact takes it's a massive decision. Okay, really think it through. Other than that, it could be maybe managed contact, and it's how you manage the contact. If they're not showing you empathy for certain things, again, you stop hoping that they will. If they haven't up until now, chances are they might not. What you might find is they do have empathy and they do have compassion, but they just might not do it when you're there. They might have it when you're not there. They might be very caring about you. They might sing your praises behind your back. You've really no idea. So it's a difficult one. It's a difficult one to answer. Only you would know the situation and the relationship there. And let me see, where do we get to? Difference between no contact and silent treatment. Well, no contact is exactly what it says. It's no contact. Silent treatment might be just for a period of time. The silent treatment is depending on I suppose the motives. It could maybe be a form of punishment. It could be a form of coercion. It could be aimed at getting someone to run after them. What's wrong? Is there anything I can do to fix this? Have I upset you? There could be that. Another aspect to the silent treatment is someone could have withdrawn. Again, it depends on the motivation. Someone could withdraw from a situation, from a relationship temporarily because they're in so much pain. They're really trying to gather their thoughts. They're not setting out to punish someone. They're trying to catch their breath, gather their thoughts, and think about what to do next. No contact is different in the sense that it's something that's going to be long term. It could even be permanent. More often than not, people think of no contact as being permanent. They just cut off contact with that person completely. They don't want to know what they're doing. They don't want them to know anything they're doing, and they're not really interested in anything that they're doing. They just want to go and live their own life. I hope that's a good explanation. I hope, anyway. I might have waffled a bit. Where do we get to? So, after 9 o'clock, looking at my last question. Some people learn to be better humans and some don't. Sad reality of life. Never accept something that feels so wrong. Took me 60 years to realize this. You're right. Some people do have the capacity for change. Some people do have the capacity for change, but they don't want to. They might be afraid to. Some people don't have any capacity for change. They double down on what they're doing. They dig their heels in and they do it even more. So, come to the end of this evening. I'm going to close this box. There we go. I hope you found this evening to be useful. Dealing with difficult people in difficult conversations. Be honest with yourself as well about what makes a conversation difficult. It could be difficult because maybe you have something to say. You might have to bring something up. You might have to confront somebody about something. Um, it could be difficult in the sense that you're dealing with someone who is just inherently disagreeable and nonsensical, and they just want to win. They just enjoy your frustration and so on. But also be genuine and honest with yourself, because we can get frustrated, we can get annoyed. We need to be honest with ourselves as to why. What's going on with me? If I want to do or say something to put this person back in their box, is there a particular reason for this? Is it just my ego? Is it is it maybe the right thing to do, the best thing to do? Being honest with yourself about what's going on with you when you're having these conversations, as much as what could be going on with the other person. So that's me for this evening. As I say, tomorrow I'm doing a video on limerence. Limerence is very interesting. I think about a year, maybe a year and a half ago, might have been, I did a live stream where I touched on limerence, just talked a bit about it. Limerence is not so much love. It's not so much even feelings of unrequited love. It's not even, it looks almost like someone has a crush on someone, a massive crush on someone, almost like when you're a teenager and you're really fancied the socks of someone. That's what it looks like on the face of it, but it can really be very consuming. It's when someone has this fantasy about another person. They have this fantasy that they are going to be the love of their life. They're going to save them. They're going to have this wonderful relationship. It's this, pardon me, it's this constant yearning for these feelings to be reciprocated. And sometimes it could be with a complete stranger. It could be someone that they've met on social media, but they don't really know them. It could be a famous person. It could be someone in work. But it's looking at this obsession that someone might have with someone else, longing for these feelings to be reciprocated. In the video, I'm looking at where it comes from, some of the possible paths that lead to it. There could be things like neglect from the past, so someone is idealizing someone. But I'm also looking at it in terms of exploitative relationships, manipulative relationships, how narcissistic people will exploit someone's need for love, for validation, with this idealized version that they may have presented of themselves. So I'm looking at those different aspects to it. I hope you find it interesting. If you do, as always, please like and leave a comment. And even tonight, as I say, if you found tonight useful, click a little like and leave a comment of some kind so that other people can find this as well. That's me for this evening. As always, I'm glad you found something interesting, something helpful. I will be back next Sunday evening, and who knows, as I say, I'll put it out there and you can leave suggestions. I'll maybe pick up on something and run with that. Other than that, just whatever comes into my head. Okay. Take care, everybody, and I'll see you next week.